The morning was strangely still, as if the world itself held its breath before an inevitable storm. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my untouched cup of coffee, when the gravity of my decision hit me. I had canceled the luxury trip my husband had planned for our anniversary. Every detail had been arranged meticulously, a Mediterranean escape filled with first-class flights, five-star hotels, and gourmet dining. I had made that call after weeks of frantic budget meetings and sleepless nights poring over our mounting bills. It was not an impulsive act but a necessary measure to save us from financial ruin. I knew it would hurt him, but I believed that protecting our future was more important than chasing a fleeting fantasy. I still recall the moments leading up to that fateful decision. For years, John had dreamt of extravagant vacations, draping our lives in a veneer of opulence that, on the surface, dazzled our friends and colleagues. I had supported him, always the practical partner, diligently working as a freelance web designer, managing our household expenses, and secretly saving every spare penny for emergencies. But as the lavish plans grew bolder, I noticed our bank balance dwindling, our credit card statements becoming red with warnings, and my own financial anxieties mounting. Despite my pleas to reconsider, John insisted that these trips were a symbol of our success, a reward for all our sacrifices. He believed that a luxury trip would cement our status and validate his dreams. I, however, saw the creeping danger of financial irresponsibility and the risk of losing everything we had painstakingly built. That morning, after much soul-searching and hesitant phone calls with our financial advisor, I pressed cancel on the booking confirmation email. I expected a burst of anger, a flood of tears, but nothing prepared me for the aftermath. I felt a sinking dread as I braced myself for John's reaction, and shortly after, the silence of our apartment was shattered by his abrupt entrance into the kitchen. I had been rinsing a plate at the sink when he stormed in, his face a mask of fury. "What did you do?" he barked, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. I looked up, startled, and tried to explain calmly, "I canceled the trip because our finances can't sustain it right now, John. We need to think about our future." His eyes, dark with disbelief and anger, narrowed dangerously. "Our future?" he repeated, stepping closer until I could see the simmering rage beneath his words. Before I could speak again, his hand lashed out, a swift, shocking blow that caught me off guard and sent a searing jolt of pain across my cheek. The hot water from the coffee pot, meant for my morning ritual, splattered against my skin as his strike knocked the mug from the counter. Time slowed. I remember the taste of bitter coffee mixing with my shock, the sound of my own gasp, and the stunned silence that followed his violent act. I staggered back, reaching instinctively for the wall as the physical agony mingled with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had made a decision I thought was necessary, and now it had ignited an eruption of violence I had never imagined. John's face, contorted in a mix of anger and hurt pride, was the last image I saw before he stormed out of the room, leaving behind an echo of his mocking laughter. For the rest of that day I felt like I was drifting in a surreal fog. The apartment, once a warm sanctuary, now felt cold and unfamiliar. I couldn't bear to look at my reflection, my cheeks still stinging, my eyes red with tears, and I found myself retreating into silence, the earlier promise of our anniversary now replaced with a looming uncertainty about my future. Friends called with sympathetic words, urging me to seek help, but I couldn't even bring myself to answer the phone. The hurt was raw, the humiliation profound, and I felt utterly alone. That evening, I sat on the back steps of our small apartment building under a sky heavy with clouds, trying to collect my thoughts. I recalled the months of planning and anticipation, the dreams of exotic destinations, and the careful budgeting I had done in secret, all now tarnished by the memory of a violent reaction. I realized that the luxury trip wasn't just about extravagance. It symbolized our differing visions for the future. I had always prioritized stability and security, while John's relentless pursuit of opulence often left me feeling ignored and undervalued. My decision to cancel was born out of necessity, a desperate attempt to protect us from financial ruin, not a rejection of his dreams. Yet his reaction was a clear, violent repudiation of my choices, a signal that beneath the surface, our marriage was crumbling. In the days that followed, I sought refuge in therapy, where Dr. Nguyen helped me untangle the labyrinth of emotions swirling inside me. "What you experienced is not your fault," she reassured me in one session, her gentle tone a lifeline in my darkened world. "Your decision was made out of love, for our future and for yourself. No one deserves to be hurt for protecting what is important." Her words were a balm, slowly mending the fractured pieces of my self-esteem, even as I grappled with the overwhelming sense of betrayal. At the same time, I began to take practical steps to reclaim control of my life. I contacted our bank to report the incident and to secure my financial accounts. I switched to a new bank with stronger fraud protection, determined that I would never again be vulnerable to someone else's recklessness. I also reached out to close friends, sharing my story with a vulnerability that was both painful and cathartic. Marissa, my lifelong friend, visited me one rainy afternoon and wrapped me in a tight embrace, promising that I was not alone. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "This is just a chapter in your story, not the whole book." Her words helped me see that, although I had been deeply wounded, I still possessed an inner strength that could carry me through. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to rebuild, not just my finances but my entire sense of self. I enrolled in a few courses to further my skills in graphic design, determined to open new avenues for my freelance career. Each new project, every positive review from a client, became a small affirmation that I was capable of forging a new future. I also started writing a blog, a raw, honest account of my journey from that violent morning to the gradual, often painful process of healing. The blog became a space where I could share my truth, and to my surprise, it resonated with many who had faced similar betrayals. The messages of support from strangers reinforced the belief that I was not defined by that singular moment of violence, but by the resilience I had discovered in its aftermath. My life gradually began to regain a sense of normalcy, though the scars of that day remained. I moved into a modest apartment, a fresh start, a blank canvas upon which to rebuild my dreams. I immersed myself in new routines, early morning runs in the park, quiet evenings with a cup of tea and a good book, and occasional nights out with friends who celebrated my newfound strength. The physical pain subsided, but the emotional residue of that day lingered like a shadow. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of a coffee cup and be reminded of the humiliation I had endured. Yet each time I resolved to rise above it, to let that memory fuel my determination rather than my despair. At work, I was more focused than ever. I accepted freelance projects that challenged me to push the boundaries of my creativity, and my reputation began to grow. Clients complimented the renewed energy in my designs, and I started to see that my work was not just a source of income but a statement of my resilience. I even attended industry conferences, where I spoke about overcoming personal adversity and the importance of safeguarding one's independence. My story, once a source of deep pain, had become a testament to the transformative power of self-belief and the relentless pursuit of a better future. Yet, as I built my new life, I also confronted the complex emotions surrounding my relationship with John. There were nights when I wondered if I could ever truly forgive him, not for his sake but for my own. Forgiveness, I learned, is not about excusing the past, it's about freeing yourself from its grip. I began to understand that I had a choice. I could allow his actions to define me or I could reclaim my narrative. I chose the latter. I realized that while I could never erase the memory of that violent act, I could use it as a catalyst for growth. I started reading books on personal empowerment and attended workshops on setting boundaries and healing from abuse. Each lesson reinforced the idea that I was worthy of love, respect, and a future that was entirely my own. My journey toward healing was not linear. There were days when the pain would surge unexpectedly, a memory of that cold morning, the sudden impact of his hand, the echo of his cruel words, and I would retreat into silence, overwhelmed by grief and anger. But gradually, through therapy, the support of friends, and my own inner resolve, I began to see a glimmer of hope. I learned to celebrate my small victories, a smile from a stranger, a compliment from a client, the first time I laughed freely in weeks. These moments, though fleeting, were a reminder that life could still be beautiful even after such deep betrayal. One crisp autumn day, nearly a year after that fateful breakfast, I attended a support group meeting for survivors of domestic violence. The room was filled with stories of pain and resilience, and as I listened, I felt a connection to each person's struggle. When it was my turn to speak, I recounted my story, of how a luxury trip cancellation had led to a violent outburst that shattered not only my trust but also the future I had envisioned. I spoke of the long, arduous journey toward reclaiming my dignity, and I found that as I spoke, the weight of my past began to lift. In that moment, I realized that sharing my truth was not a sign of weakness, but a declaration of strength. The support and understanding that filled the room reaffirmed my belief that I was not alone, and that, together, we could forge new beginnings from even the darkest chapters. Meanwhile, John's behavior grew increasingly erratic. In the months following the incident, he avoided public gatherings and rarely spoke to our mutual friends. His once confident demeanor was replaced by a sullen, isolated figure who seemed unable to cope with the fallout of his actions. I heard whispers that he was attending anger management classes, and that even his family was beginning to distance themselves from his unpredictable behavior. Though a small part of me felt a twinge of regret for what he had become, I knew that I could no longer allow his choices to affect my own path. My focus had shifted from salvaging a broken relationship to rebuilding a future defined by my own resilience and independence. The legal proceedings for divorce moved steadily forward. I stood before the judge, my testimony a clear and honest account of that morning's violence. The courtroom was a stark environment, filled with the weight of legal language and formal proceedings, but it was also a place where my truth was finally acknowledged. When the judge issued the final divorce decree, granting me sole custody of our joint assets and issuing a restraining order against John, I felt a mixture of sorrow and liberation. It was a formal severance of the bond that had once promised everlasting love, a bond that had been tainted by violence and betrayal. Yet, it was also the moment when I reclaimed my future, free from the shadow of his cruelty. In the aftermath of the divorce, I devoted myself to healing and self-discovery. I transformed my new apartment into a sanctuary, a space filled with light, art, and reminders of the strength I had cultivated. I began a new chapter in my career, accepting freelance projects that allowed me to explore new creative horizons and connect with clients who valued authenticity. I continued to write on my blog, each post a step toward healing and a declaration of my renewed self-worth. My writing resonated with readers, and I began to receive messages of support from people who had faced their own betrayals, each message a small victory against the isolation I had once felt. The journey was not without setbacks. There were moments when I would be overwhelmed by memories of that violent breakfast, the sting of the coffee, the shock of the slap, the echo of John's callous laughter. On such days, I would retreat into my art, channeling my pain into paintings that were raw, unfiltered expressions of my journey. Over time, my artwork evolved into a celebration of resilience, a visual diary of my transformation from a victim of betrayal into a woman who stood tall, unafraid to claim her power. I even held a small exhibition at a local gallery, where the response was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers praised the depth and honesty of my work, and I realized that my pain had given birth to beauty, a beauty that was uniquely mine. As I continued to rebuild my life, I also began to redefine what family meant to me. I reached out to old friends who had always been there for me, forming bonds that were based not on obligation but on genuine care and mutual respect. I found solace in communities that valued honesty and empathy, and I learned to set boundaries that protected my well-being. My journey taught me that family is not solely defined by blood or by the expectations of tradition, but by the people who lift you up and affirm your worth. 1 year after that fateful anniversary, I returned to a holiday gathering, not with John, but with a small circle of chosen family who had supported me through every dark moment. The atmosphere was different, warm, accepting, and free of judgment. As I exchanged heartfelt greetings and listened to stories of resilience from those around me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I realized that while I could never forget the pain of betrayal, I had the power to transform it into a foundation for a brighter future. That day, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer allow the ghosts of the past to dictate my happiness. I would continue to move forward, to create a life filled with joy, creativity, and unwavering self-respect. Now, as I sit in the gentle glow of the evening in my cozy apartment, surrounded by art, handwritten notes, and the quiet hum of city life, I reflect on the long, winding path that brought me here. The memory of that violent moment, the shock of the slap when I canceled a luxury trip meant to safeguard our future, still lingers like a faint scar. But it is not a mark of defeat. It is a testament to my resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, I found the strength to rise again. I have reclaimed my power, rebuilt my life piece by piece, and learned that true empowerment comes from within. This is my story, a journey of betrayal and healing, of a woman who was forced to confront the darkest side of love and who emerged stronger and more self-assured. It is a story of courage, of the painful lessons learned when someone you trusted turns violent in the face of disagreement, and of the indomitable spirit that refuses to be broken. I have transformed heartbreak into a driving force for self-discovery and success. I now live a life defined not by the cruelty of my past, but by the hope and determination that guide me every day. And though I will always carry the memory of that fateful breakfast, I choose to see it as the catalyst for my rebirth, a moment that set me on the path to becoming the resilient, empowered woman I am today.